Heading into the 2026 World Juniors, the race for first overall in this draft class has never been closer. Gavin McKenna came into this season as the consensus, no doubt, best player in this draft class, but since then, things have been shifting. So that begs the question, which prospects are fighting for that first overall spot, which prospects have a realistic shot at being a competitor, and which of them do I think are the best competition for Gavin McKenna's spot? But make sure you guys watch till the end as we answer that very question, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey draft content just like this all throughout the year, especially the World Juniors coming up. So much that you won't want to miss. The nice thing about this year's World Juniors is that we're going to have a lot of players in this race actually being featured, at least on the preliminary rosters. Now, when we talk about players that could go first overall next June, I still think, even with all the conversation around him, even on this channel, that Gavin McKenna is the most likely guy to go number one if the draft were to happen today or in a few months' time. As much as his NCAA season has kind of exposed some flaws in McKenna's game, he's still one of the most talented players to come in the draft over the last few years with his vision, creativity, the playmaking, and how much he's able to command a shift when he does have the puck on his stick. It's pretty magical what he's capable of. In terms of the production, he's currently at 18 points and 14 assists through 16 games. I still think a lot of that production has been very power play heavy, and that's kind of skewed things just a little bit, but also I don't think the luck has been entirely going his way throughout the course of the season, so I think it evens it out a bit. Even if Gavin McKenna doesn't end up slipping for most people out there, I do think what this season has shown is that he's not this undeniable force out there that has no flaws and will just come in as your generational next forward piece. I don't think that's quite the case, but the talent is still radiant. Because as much as he's not putting up the production of the Celebrinis and the Fantillis of the world, I do think the college hockey experience has become much harder than it has been even just a couple seasons ago. The wealth of talent now is just undeniable, and I think it's a big step up that McKenna's been having to kind of battle with. So even though I have my problems with his defensive level, the effort, especially away from the puck, the talent is still undeniable and is still the most likely player to go first overall because of that. He can be a franchise-changing face. There is still a lot, though, I think he needs to work on to eventually get there. But because of the issues that we've seen out of McKenna this season, I think that's kind of opened up a bigger conversation. Is there any prospects that could eventually challenge him for first overall, and who would those prospects be? Now, for one, I absolutely think there can be some prospects out there that challenge him. In my personal rankings, McKenna is second place, and still I think the biggest competition to McKenna is Keaton Verhoeff. And even though in terms of the forward competition, I think an Ivar Stenberg is getting really close to McKenna, we'll talk about him in a minute. In terms of teams passing up on a McKenna type of talent, it's much more likely they'll pass up on a McKenna type of talent for a defenseman, especially a right shot one that's big and physical, skates well, has a lot of potential left to give, than another winger. That's where I think Verhoeff has the most potential to go first overall, because if, let's say, San Jose ends up collapsing and they get that first overall pick, sure, McKenna would be unbelievable on that Sharks team, but Verhoeff just fits what they need so much better. And even though Verhoeff hasn't lit the world on fire in terms of production either, similarly to McKenna, I think he's played very well considering the NCHC is the strongest, in my opinion, division in college hockey, and considering the workload, considering what he's been thrust upon, I think he's done quite well. Sure, there's a couple mistakes here and there, but you can see the reliability and how much that projects. Even if his production isn't sky high, he still has 11 points and 4 goals through 16 games. That shot especially has been a massive weapon. He's been good on the power play as well, quarterbacking that quite well. So there's a lot of things to like here. Like McKenna, I don't think Verhoeff has completely taken over the NCAA, but he's quite a bit younger than McKenna is, plays a more premium position, and of course, with that size too, I think is probably the most realistic option to end up overtaking him. But of course, he will be at this year's World Juniors for the Canadian team as well, and I think he's a pretty big lock to make it. The big question will be how many minutes he's playing, because in McKenna's case, he's pretty likely to get those top 6 minutes, get those power play opportunities, which will rise the point totals. But in Verhoeff's case, he might get the third pair option as a right D. That's probably the best he's going to get, and that could limit how good his tournament ends up being. But especially with a good second half, I could pretty easily see Verhoeff making that conversation difficult for NHL GMs. Again, in terms of the public scouting world, most people just go based off of talent, but for teams deciding between a smaller, less physical forward and a dependable right shot D in a Verhoeff, I think that conversation is a lot closer than some people might expect. Again, you got to get in the head of NHL GMs and franchises. For somebody as clearly translatable as Verhoeff, he's going to make that conversation real interesting. But let's talk about the forward that I think is the biggest competitor to a Gavin McKenna, and somebody that is making things crazy right now in terms of the conversation, in Ivar Stenberg out of the SHL. Another one that will be at the World Juniors Juniors this year, and likely, like McKenna, will be getting a big opportunity on Sweden's top 6. He is on the older side of this draft, but he has been exceptional in the SHL this year, almost a point per game as a draft eligible, playing really the best draft eligible season we've seen out of any forward in the SHL in its entire history. Outside of the Swedish hockey scene, it's not getting talked about enough, but among draft-eligible players ever in the SHL, Stenberg is far and away the best in points per game, right now at 0.96 with 24 points in 25 games. That's higher than Daniel Sedin, Peter Forsberg, Henrik Sedin, Elias Lindholm. You just go down the list of absolute legends, and nobody was even really close, at least up to this point. Now, granted, Sedin played twice the amount of games, so a bit of a shorter sample size, but if he's hovering around Daniel Sedin type production in his SHL season, I mean, that's about as good as you can get, really. But it's because of just how good Stenberg has been that this is a conversation to begin with. Not just in terms of the talent offensively, which is there, the passing ability, the creativity, it's immense. But what I love about Stenberg the most is he turns his great skill into elite skill because of his effort level, how much he's willing to get into the fight. Not like big hits out or anything, but he's so good at entering pressure and escaping from it, or closing pressure in and using that pressure to open a teammate up and get the pass across out of nowhere. He's just somebody that has that extra sense on the ice, similarly to McKenna, not quite on the same level, but the type of adaptability he has, the physicality in his game, how good he is around the boards too, how good of an anticipator of physical pressure he is, leads me to a pretty safe, on top of a really high ceiling projection. Compared to a McKenna who plays a bit leisurely without the puck, kind of waiting for the play to come to him, Stenberg is there to create opportunities for not just himself, but his teammates every single shift, and I love that just dog-in-him mentality on top of having that pretty game-breaking skill. But Stenberg is another one that has a chance to make a big stamp at this year's World Juniors, pending a horrible Sweden collapse yet again. Stenberg should be pretty close, I would say, to McKenna in terms of point production, and if he is, I think that really opens up the conversation even further. Now on to yet another player that'll be at this year's World Juniors making their mark in Chase Reed of Team USA. At least I hope he does. We still don't have the official roster announced, but he is on the preliminary roster, and honestly, I think he has a good chance of making it. And I'll say this too, I think in terms of Verhoeff compared to Reed, I think Reed has a bigger opportunity at this year's World Juniors, just because for the US, they don't have that clear number 2 power play guy, compared to the Canadians who could have a Jackson Smith behind a Zane Parekh and limit the amount of minutes that Verhoeff ends up playing. But I could see Reed playing a top 4 position with this US team and really making things interesting with just how well he plays, because he has been a rock star over the last year and a half. After not even making the USHL and going on to the NAHL, he has just been unbelievable since then, converting onto the OHL level and just being dynamite offensively. 33 points and 13 goals this year in 29 games for the Sioux. Unbelievable production for something that's still not even 18. Now, I will say in terms of the guys fighting for first overall, I think Reed is still a ways out because he hasn't quite had the name recognition of a Verhoeff or even an Ivar Stenberg over the last couple of years. He's really burst onto the scene fairly recently, so I think it might take him some more time to get there. But I love Chase Reed. Even though I don't quite see him coming in first place in my rankings when it's all said and done, I love how projectable he is with his skating, with his vision on the ice, especially in transition. He is just a beautiful passer. I would say he's pretty dependable physically. The one thing that I think is kind of a bit of an issue is the rush offense against him, and sometimes I think he doesn't quite use the skating as much as I'd want him to when tackers are going straight at him, but still, that's something I think he can eventually round out, and also might just be an issue not playing many games over the past couple of years. Heck, on the Elite Prospects ranking, they had Chase Reed over Keaton Verhoeff. So in terms of D that could compete there, Reed definitely has some momentum here. Now we have a couple forwards to talk about here today, and a couple ones that still intrigue me as potential options for number 1, even if I don't think they're the most likely. First, starting out with Ethan Belchetz, also out of the OHL. Belchetz is a bit of a wild card to me because he's had a great season up to this point for Windsor, and in terms of the potential there, could have a few specific GMs absolutely salivating. At 6'5", 227 pounds, the skill level he has is immeasurable, and what Beckett Seneca has done this year as a rookie, I think could lead to Belchetz maybe getting a bit more looks than he otherwise would have. And so far this year in Windsor, 29 points through 27 games and 17 goals. Now, Belchetz I've been up and down on throughout this season. I still think would be around the 5 range for me when it's all said and done. I do have some concerns over the foot speed, even if it has improved over the last year. And I do think the playmaking is a bit of a weakness for him, but the goal scoring capacity, the skill in transition, how he's able to will his way to the net, he just just has such an interesting mix of tools, and of course, with that size, is going to get a look within that top 5, potentially even top 3. Another case, though, where it does sting a bit that he is a wing, because if he was a center, I think there would be a lot more conversation around him too. But I think Belchetz is going to be an interesting one, because if a team is much more safe heavy, if they want to go for a much more projectable type of player while bringing some great skill to the table, want to go for a much bigger player, for example, then Belchetz could make sense. I still think the production needs to improve a bit more, especially in the playmaking department, to actually get there, but I think it is worth the conversation. And the last player I wanted to mention here as a true contender for first overall, and we'll see how much it ends up going, because he's had a great start to this season, in Tynan Lawrence out of the Lumberjacks in the USHL. Now, I do think everybody will mention today he's probably the least likely to go first overall, but I think what helps Lawrence a ton is that he's really the only elite center in this class, at least as of right now. You could argue that players like Caleb Malhotra and Oliver Savanto are solid, and I would absolutely agree with that, but I think Lawrence is the only one that comes close to the top 5 for me. And don't get me wrong, he is a natural center to his core. He is somebody that will lead up the middle, and I think will be a very strong top 6er in the future. Plus, is pretty young for this class too. With an August birth date, that also does factor in quite a bit. But in the USHL this year, after being injured to start things out, he's been terrific as of late, getting 8 goals, 13 points through 7 games. I do think a lot of people will say that yes, the scoring has to be there. The USHL is a lower league, but I do think the USHL gets a bit more flack than it deserves because of how lower it is and how much the attention just isn't quite there, but it is very strong defensively, especially the systems there are incredibly intense physically, and it's not an easy league to score in, but Lawrence has kind of always made it look easy. He just reminds me so much of Nick Suzuki pretty much every single time I watch him when it comes to the dependability up the middle, how good he is in transition, how much he's able to bring in pressure just to make opponents pay because of that. He's just so smart all over the ice, always makes the right decisions, and the skill level on top of that is pretty solid to boot. And again, because he is so young, I think that opens up the conversation as somebody that is still fairly inexperienced. Will be going to BU next year, so you will be seeing some NCAA opportunities there. But in terms of natural centers, again, that positional need could lead some teams to give him a longer look. At the end of the day, we know just how much NHL GMs and teams value centers and right shot defensemen, these cornerstone positions, way more than they do the wing. And it's just the reality of the situation. And it also helps Lawrence's case that I don't think any of the wings here in McKenna, Stenberg, or Belchetz are really going to be playing much center in the future. Maybe Belchetz, but I don't know if he has quite the positional awareness to be able to make it there. McKenna, in terms of the defensive level, I just don't think it's possible. Stenberg, maybe, but I do think his best moments are along the boards, so having him as a center I think is a bit of a disservice to him. So in terms of those natural centers, even if it might not lead him to go first overall, I would not be surprised if Lawrence goes number 2 or number 3 when it's all said and done, because of how much teams lean towards the middle of the ice when they pick that hot. Looking at the Tankathon standings, it's not an exact science, especially with how crazy the Eastern Conference has been, but at least this is how it looks as of now, and I think it would be interesting to see who ends up winning that first overall pick, because I do think it changes quite a bit. You have teams in Vancouver and Nashville right at the top right now that have drafted a lot of really interesting wings over the last couple of years, but not a lot of strong centers, especially a team like Vancouver really needs some juice up the middle. But if they're also going to trade a Quinn Hughes, then they could really use some more defensive reassurance. So for a team like Vancouver winning first overall, even though McKenna would be the most fascinating project there, in terms of team need, in terms of organization need, it makes it a bit more difficult. Buffalo also still has a bit of an issue when it comes to the right side of their defense. Would a Verhoeff or a Reed be a good option there? Absolutely. Calgary has drafted a ton of wingers over the last couple of years, not a lot up the middle, and that's been a serious organizational need. So maybe that's a team that could potentially make a swing. St. Louis also kind of has a bit of everything within their prospect pool. Maybe they would lean towards McKenna to add some more juice there. But you got a team like Utah that does not need more skill first forwards. If they somehow win the lottery, I would probably see them going for a player like a Lawrence or a player like a Keaton Verhoeff, trying to get some more physicality there. And a team like San Jose at 7th overall, if they were to get the first overall pick, I don't know if they go for the wing there either. So there's just so many teams that could be towards the bottom of the basement that I don't quite see as perfect fits for McKenna, even if they could go for it. But that's the in-depth look on the prospects that could challenge for that first overall pick and make things very interesting this next summer. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the breakdown. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and the notification bell. Comment down below your thoughts on the prospects we talked about today, and if there's anybody out there that could challenge McKenna, who do you think is the most realistic to do that? If you guys want some more videos as well, you can become a channel member here today by hitting the join button next to the subscribe button or hitting the link in the description down below. We recently put out a member Ask Me Anything video with some really interesting topics. We actually talked about Stenberg versus McKenna specifically. So some real good content there coming out every single week. But if you guys support for just a couple bucks a month, you get those exclusive videos every single week on top of member polls every week, as well as exclusive emoji used in the chat. And a big thank you to all the current members. Their names will be up here on the screen. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Make sure you have a fantastic cocky day, and goodbye.